Welcome back, everyone. Now we will be looking at something different, ladies and gentlemen, how the application of medical technology improve people's health by preventing, diagnosing, monitoring, and treating diseases. To start this session, it's my pleasure to welcome the chairman of the session, Ms. Bushra bin Saud, president of Danahir Corporation, Middle East, Africa, and Turkey, and co-chairman, Mr. Raymond Berglund, managing director and head of health and life sciences at Alvarez and Marsal. It's a great pleasure to have both of you with us at the Riyadh Global Medical Biotechnology Summit 2021.
Thank you very much for this great introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the session number 7 of the KMARC Biotechnology Global Summit, which will focus on the MedTech and Diagnostics industry. As already introduced, my name is Bushra bin Saud. I am the regional president for Danahir Corporation in Middle East, Africa, and Turkey. I will be co-chairing this session with Mr. Raymond Berglund, who will lead our panel discussion. Today, and thanks to our esteemed speakers, we will try as much as possible to shed some lights on the diagnostics industry, its future trends, and then we will zoom onto the Saudi market. During the pandemic, we have realized more than ever how important the diagnostics and the MedTech industry were and how they could impact us personally, professionally, in so many ways. So in today's session, we will have, in fact, the chance to look at the topic through a variety of lenses. We will have 6 speakers. We will have Mr. Ian Sharp-Paul and Mr. Sherif Haridi from the Cepheid company. We will have Mr. Perry Frederick and Mr. Eli Shayo from GP Healthcare. Dr. Ahmed Az-Zahrani from Ministry of National Guard Health Affairs, and Mr. Raymond Berglund will also cover for us a session. Welcome to our speakers, and without further ado, I'll call on stage my 2 colleagues, Mr. Ian and Mr. Sherif, that I already introduced. So a quick background on Cepheid. This is a global leader in molecular diagnostics, and Cepheid has been in the forefront of the fight against COVID-19. Another quick fact around the 2 leaders that will be speaking. Ian has been in the Cepheid company for more than a decade. He has been mostly working in commercial and marketing leadership positions in Europe, in Africa, and emerging markets. Welcome, Ian. Sherif has also been with the company since 2011, mostly focusing on commercial and general management leadership positions in the Middle East and North Africa region, Turkey, and Central Asia. So Ian and Sherif will walk us through what is the role that the molecular diagnostics had in the fight against the COVID-19 and beyond. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bushra. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. My name's Ian Sharp-Paul. As Bushra said, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Can we just pull up the slides? I'm not able to see the slides.
You are on the first slide. You can get started.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I can't actually see them. Just bear with me 1 second. I can't see them. Oh, there they are. Sorry, bear with me. Sorry, I was on the wrong screen. Thank you so much, Bushra. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much again. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. As Bushra said, we're going to talk today about the role molecular diagnostics had in the fight against COVID and what are some of the possible future applications we can look at for molecular diagnostics now that we've drastically increased our capacity and utilization of PCR during the pandemic. So just to get us started a little bit, just a quick overview of Cepheid and who we are. So as Bushra said, we are a molecular diagnostics company. We have the Gene Expert range of systems, and on that we run a cartridge-based PCR range of tests for which we have more than 30 tests available, which are CE marked. We have distribution in more than 100 countries. In fact, we have systems in around 180 countries, so pretty much every country in the world. We have more than 5,000 employees, and to date, we have over 30,000 gene expert systems placed all over the globe. One of our big focuses as a company is on quality. So we've been working, for example, with the US government, the US Postal Service to screen mail, and we've run more than 17 million anthrax tests without a single false positive. To go just a little bit deeper into our technology, so our technology is really centered on three main things: speed, accuracy, and ease of use. We also have incredible scalability. So our tests or our systems are designed to run from a single test up to 80 at a time, and can scale up to being able to run more than 2,000 in a single day. What this allows us to do is place systems either in the hospital laboratory, as you would expect, but also near patient bedsides, in intensive care units, at the emergency department, but also in non-healthcare settings, like community testing, health outposts, and mobile testing units, which is particularly important when you think about the current pandemic and the need to get testing closer to patients and make it more accessible. But then let's look at molecular diagnostics more broadly and the fight against coronavirus. So molecular diagnostics have really come to the fore during the pandemic. So molecular diagnostics, PCR, has been central to the response against the COVID pandemic, and has become the global gold standard for diagnosing and tracking, diagnosing cases to limit the spread and tracking those patients. We've seen a record number of tests, in fact, more than 100 tests developed by multiple manufacturers all over the world, and in record time. In just the space of a couple of months, we saw dozens of tests come to the market to start to try to help in the diagnosis, the identification of SARS-CoV-2. And thanks to strong investment by hospitals and others, we've seen a big increase, a huge increase, in fact, in the capacity available of PCR tests and PCR platforms. We've also, during the pandemic, seen a lot of movement in terms of innovation. So one of the things that's been recognised very early on is the need to get results back as quickly as possible, both for the clinical outcome, but also to know so the patients are aware of their status and they can act accordingly. So we've seen a big drive towards reducing the turnaround time, and then also a drive towards moving testing closer to the patients. So that decentralization has become a big theme that we've all probably become very familiar with. We now see tests and platforms placed not just in the laboratories, but also in airports, in drive-through clinics. We see them at sporting events, workplaces, and so on. So the PCR or molecular technology has now spread well beyond the traditional settings and has been able to be really ubiquitous across the market and across the geographies as we fight against the current pandemic. But when we look a little bit further ahead, there are some other opportunities where we can leverage this increased capacity and increased awareness around PCR. So just one example of that we'll talk about a little bit today is around antimicrobial resistance. So here's a quote from a recent paper from Bengochea and Bamford from last year, where they talk about the fact that the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic is not the only pandemic we're dealing with. That pandemic is overlaid against or over the top of an ongoing pandemic around multi-drug resistant bacteria. As we've seen SARS-CoV-2 being transmitted between patients within hospitals, we'll also see multi-drug resistant bacteria being transmitted, which has a drastic increase in mortality. And because of the limited arsenal of antibiotics left available in to fight against these bacteria, it drastically increases the risk to patients and increases the risk of mortality and morbidity. So one particular area of AMR that is of grave concern are carbapenemase producing Enterobacterales. So these are incredibly prevalent, unfortunately, and really represent one of the greatest threats to public health ongoing beyond this pandemic. If we look to the Middle East region, unfortunately, it's not immune from this. We here in the Middle East see endemic CPE strains across. We see OXA48, NDM, and KPC. And because of the interconnectivity of the world today, these strains and these pathogens are very free to move between regions, and we've seen the fast spread of AMR, drug-resistant bacteria, and other pathogens moving between regions and causing significant issues. When we drill down one step further into Saudi Arabia, as an example, we're seeing an increase in prevalence of CPE or CRE. This is leading to outbreaks in some hospitals, and it's a growing concern within the Saudi Arabian healthcare system. These, as I said before, represent significant risk factors, and it's something that we really need to get on top of. And that's where molecular diagnostics come in. So molecular diagnostics provide the opportunity to identify carriers of these diseases or of these pathogens as quickly as possible, so that not only do you know how to treat that patient, but you also know what to do with them in the meantime. Putting them in isolation is costly and often not practical in some settings. So getting a rapid result and identifying both what the pathogen is and what the resistance mechanism is are critical. So you know how to treat them and how to place them within appropriately within the medical healthcare system. So as I said, we've seen significant growth in the capacity of PCR. We've also seen a lot of increased awareness and availability of molecular diagnostics. We've seen it being distributed to many new settings. And on top of that, we're seeing a number of areas of innovation. We already talked before about the drive to reduce the turnaround time. The faster we can get the results, the better the clinical outcome, the more we know how to deal with that patient, and we can place them appropriately. We've also seen drastic improvements in the simplicity of this technology. That's allowed us to decentralize into those non-healthcare settings, and also within healthcare settings, pushing the testing not just from the core lab, not just in the core lab, but push it to bedside, push it in ICU, emergency department, and other areas. One of the other areas that continues to be developed is the divergence, more the broadening of menu offering. We see very targeted, high-quality tests looking at single pathogens like coronavirus, for example, or SARS-CoV-2. But then we also see a lot of new increasing panels, multiplex panels, which allow us to look at multiple pathogens at the same time. We can also call out particular strains or variants of interest. And we can also identify specific drug resistance mechanisms so that we can direct the clinicians and the pharmacists to the right treatment to deal with that patient. So if you think about the impact, it really boils down, most importantly, to better clinical outcomes. An accurate diagnosis earlier on has a better impact or a better outcome for those patients, and also allows us to manage those patients more appropriately in terms of isolation and where they go within the hospital. We're also drastically seeing an increase in access to care. Any patient today, particularly for coronavirus, can really go to a number of settings, not just their hospital, in order to get diagnosed and ultimately treated for coronavirus. Not only does this improve the convenience for the patient, but it also improves the outcomes when a clinician is able to access those results quickly and can act upon them. And because of the broadening test availability or test menu, clinicians are able to determine the right test for the right patient at the right time. So with that, I'm actually going to hand over to my colleague Sharif, who's going to talk a little bit more about Cepheid and the role we're playing in Saudi Arabia, and then talk about some of the specific challenges we face in the diagnostic world within Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. My name is Sharif Haridi. I'm leading Cepheid business in this geography since a decade. Cepheid started with small presence in the Middle East region back in 2011 with limited activities and limited business. Now in 2021, Cepheid is partnered and well-positioned to continue driving several healthcare-associated initiatives, disease prevention programs, and screening policies. We are available in 18 countries in the region with 24 team members. We have more than 1,100 gene expert systems deployed and running, while the biggest presence is in Saudi Arabia with more than 350 systems. PCR used to be known as a complicated, in fact, still known as a complicated testing, requires big auto analyzers, which are batch driven, occupying big space and dedicated space only for the PCR, demanding daily maintenance with bulk storage of short life reagents. Cepheid technology is the game changer of the PCR testing. We are using simple, durable, easy to use and easy to maintain gene expert system, along with the heart of our technology, which is the test cartridge. The magical test cartridge, we call. It's the biggest and yet expanding menu in molecular testing, with more than 30 CE IVD molecular diagnostics tests available. The flexibility and modularity of the gene expert system makes it the best in class and the first choice of any size lab in any size hospital and any point of care testing site, as Ian mentioned. The testing power of the gene expert system varies from few tests per shift of 8 hours in any small setup to few thousands per shift in any big hospital or public health laboratory. The same system, the same cartridge, the same technology, and most importantly, the same quality of result wherever you conduct the test. We differentiated ourselves early enough, driving towards prevention of several diseases and healthcare associated infections. While others were busy running behind diagnosing, we started to have the initiatives into the regional screening policies and disease prevention programs, which improved the clinical value and consequently the impact on the patients in need. Important to mention that 45% of our business and activities are coming from Saudi Arabia, while the remaining 55% are coming from the rest of the Middle East countries. Next slide, please. We in Cepheid, as well as many others in the diagnostics industry in Saudi, were faced with several challenges, which once resolved or minimized, will enable the diagnostics to play bigger and more important role to improve the outcome and the clinical value of the diagnostics result and minimize the impact of these challenges to a bigger extent. With Saudi extended geography improving patient outreach and be available close to the patients while providing the same quality of care and outcome will remain a challenge and the strategic objective, while improving the turnaround time through eliminating the need to batch and collect certain number of patient samples to perform the testing. As the patients do not come in batches, we need to serve them as they come. Lack of enough number of highly qualified and experienced technologists demand and dictate simple while accurate and fast technology, which will minimize the need of highly skilled and highly qualified operators. Made it easy to adopt and operate anywhere and at any level of infrastructure and manpower. Adopt and activate, practice, enforce policies which is already in place to drive and promote prevention versus diagnosing of healthcare associated infections, multi-drug resistant organisms, to reduce hospital days stay and infection rates anywhere in the healthcare setup. Disseminated and segregated budget into different function specialty within the healthcare organization versus holistic look at the entire budget and spending. This will drive the awareness towards the total cost of the service versus individualized price assessment, which will always lead to silo actions and silo decision making. Integration of information, communication, digital and remote technologies need serious consideration in order to increase and accelerate not only the adoption of the implementation of the advanced technologies, but also the overall competencies and effectiveness of the country at the healthcare system. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Sharif. So just to summarize, so we talked already a lot about molecular diagnostics and the role they played, and they'll continue to play an important role as we continue the fight against coronavirus. We've seen how the deployment of this technology from traditional settings to non-traditional settings and getting closer and closer to patients has highlighted both their value and utility. But as we look forward, both through the end of this pandemic, but also with the risk of other pandemics, we see there are a lot of other opportunities to leverage molecular diagnostics, and not just in the area of infectious disease. We have significant challenges with aging populations around oncology, non-communicable diseases and other areas, and these are more opportunities for us to leverage the benefits and utility and efficiency and accuracy of molecular diagnostics to improve patient outcomes. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and hand back to Bushra. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you for the very interesting insight, and I hope that the audience would have appreciated, what you explained. I will, for the interest of time, I still would like just probably a little clarification for the audience. It's more about the opportunity that the molecular device brings, specifically in Saudi, but independently from the COVID-19 tailwinds. We know that brought obviously a huge spike for us, and we somehow see that every day. But if we decouple the COVID-19 impact versus our, let's say, I would call it base business, how do you see the opportunity in Saudi? And I would like Sharif to give us his views. Sharif, you are on mute. Okay.
Yeah. While we were supporting the activities around COVID, we were never lose the focus towards the other respiratory and also multi-drug resistant infection, which is very important. And going forward after COVID, this will remain. And with the lack of antimicrobials coming in the pipeline of many pharmaceutical pharmacies, I think we have very less to handle in terms of antibiotics. So we were driving the focus towards continue screening and implementing prevention approach towards the antimicrobial resistant or multi-drug resistant organism, mainly the CARBA-R and MRSA, carbapenemase producers, and the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And while everybody was focusing on the COVID, we were again driving the screening and the preventive approach towards those centennial microorganisms.
Thank you, Sharif. And with that, we will move to our next speaker. So I'm going to invite on the floor Mr. Perry Frederick. Perry is a Senior Director, Strategic Research Europe, Middle East and Africa at GE Healthcare. Perry is leading a team of clinical research scientists supporting strategic studies across the EMEA region. Perry and his team play an essential role in delivering evidence for GE Healthcare strategic research needs. Perry will, in this session, will walk us through the oncology care pathway solutions from GE Healthcare. With that, Perry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bushra. Can you hear me okay?
We do. Hear you very well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that introduction. I welcome everyone to this session. I might ask for help in advancing the slides. I'm having a little trouble with my cell phone. So if we could go to the next slide, please. In terms of an agenda, I'll be describing today the global cancer incidence and current challenges that we face in this area. And I'd like to cover how we can beat cancer with a focus on precision care as applied to the patient pathway. And then finally, I'll share care pathway evolution that we see in 3 prevalent cancer types, namely lung, prostate, and breast cancer. Next slide, please. So in terms of incidence, global cancer cases totaled over 18 million back in 2018, with nearly half of those cases coming from Asia, including the Middle East. Moreover, global cases are expected to increase nearly 70% over the period of 2012 to 2030. With this burden, key reported challenges are early and accurate detection, access to precise diagnosis and treatment, cancer complexities and treatment personalization, as well as managing reoccurrence and risk. Next slide, please. Thank you. As shown in this graph, adapted from a recent Nature article, and I'll ask you to focus initially at the left, today's care methods are resulting in high tumor burden at diagnosis, which then unfortunately continues to increase due to therapy resistance, and this negatively impacts quality of life and survival. To improve therapy response and outcomes, we identify 5 potential solutions. These are earlier detection and prevention, including asymptomatic screening, precise diagnosis, targeted treatment, therapy surveillance and adaptation, and finally, quality of life monitoring. And as shown at the far right, applications of these solutions can hopefully lead to improved outcomes. Next slide, please. So these solutions I just mentioned form the basis of what we call precision cancer care as it applies to the patient experience or pathway. Thus, from left to right, screening is improved by selecting the right therapy. Diagnosis is improved by integrating the right data. Treatment is improved by guiding therapy to the disease and intervening at the right place and the right time. And follow-up is improved by monitoring the right signals or signs. By bringing the appropriate technologies and solutions to bear upon the problem we face, we could support our clinicians and deliver better outcomes for their patients. So let's apply this to our key cancer examples I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Please back up one. I'm sorry, I didn't see that you had advanced to the, okay, thank you. Sorry for that. Okay, so we begin with lung cancer and consider the rationale for reassessing current care models. So first, lung cancer is the #1 cause of cancer death globally. Second, the survival rate is less than 20%, and this is at stage 4, with more than half of all patients being diagnosed at this late stage. So clearly too late in the game. Third, 40% of patients will wait more than 2 months to receive their diagnosis. This is clearly wasting precious follow-up time. Next slide. So here we've depicted the current care path across the top. And what I'd like to focus on is emerging and future technologies which appear at the center of the slide and below. So emerging innovations applied to this pathway begin with targeted screening, shown to reduce mortality by nearly 25% in males, in concert with AI reporting and decision support. In the diagnosis phase, rapid staging on the order of 10 days will be enabled with precision biopsy, using ultrasound guidance to replace CT or fluoroscopy methods. Treatment will be enhanced with greater precision in CT and PET-based radiation therapies. Moving to the future, screening and diagnostic events will be enhanced by 2 levels of data integration. Patient-level integration, something we call OncoFlow, will combine imaging, EMR, genomics, and pathology data in a single view for caregivers. System-level integration, something we call Cancer Cockpit, will provide capacity, utilization, and patient flow visualization. Treatment planning will be enhanced by prediction response to immunotherapies. And finally, remote patient monitoring technologies will provide earlier warning of deterioration and acute events. Next slide. Considering now prostate cancer in terms of occurrence growth, we find that by 2030, it is predicted to be the most common cancer type in the UK. Also, inaccuracy of PSA screening is translating up to 75% false positives and 15% cancers missed. In addition, diagnostic inaccuracies mean nearly 50% of cancers are mischaracterized as slow growing, leading to errors in treatment planning. Finally, 60% of men are waiting more than 2 weeks for this error-prone diagnosis. So clearly we can do better. Next slide. Once again, emerging developments yielding a more precise screening and diagnosis include faster and more comfortable multi-parametric MR imaging in the first instance, as well as use of gallium PSMA in conjunction with PET-CT and PET-MR imaging devices. Likewise, biopsy accuracy will improve with MR and ultrasound image fusion. Application of these technologies should result in a rapid assessment pathway on the order of 1 week. Similarly, treatment planning and execution will be enhanced with custom brachytherapy using CT on rails, as well as MR-only radiotherapy planning, embolization, as well as increased adoption of theranostics. Finally, monitoring will improve with gallium PSMA and PET-CT in combination with other low-risk surveillance methods in the community. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, if you could go back one. There's one more thing I wanted to point out. As was the case with the lung example, we also see the ability to introduce patient and system level data integration platforms once again to drive precision and efficiency during the screening and diagnosis steps. In addition, advanced dosimetry and home observation developments will help improve treatment and monitoring phases. Next slide, please. Our final example, breast cancer, starts with a focus on patient experience. As you see here, imagine an individual faced with 300 appointments, utilizing up to 9 different technologies in different locations, translating to up to 3,000 kilometers of required travel in some cases. Additional impacts include the pain and anxiety of delayed results, in addition to managing multiple caregiver interfaces. Next slide. An emerging development in this case, which will positively impact screening, involves invasive cancer detection for dense breast using automated breast ultrasound imaging. During the treatment phase, increased adoption of contrast-enhanced spectral mammography, which is an add-on to our mammography products, as a first-line diagnostics for biopsy and surgical planning is envisioned, as well as ultrasound-guided biopsy using fused MR images. Also, reduction in ultrasound-based reporting variability will be enabled with AI tools from partners like Kios and others. Next, radiotherapy treatment planning will be enhanced by linking key imaging modalities with partners like Elekta. And finally, to improve upon the patient experience, we will operationalize same-day feedback and assurance models for rapid results, resulting in reducing related anxieties. Next slide. So this concludes my presentation. In closing, I want to thank you all for your attention today and for all you do to improve lives around the world in moments that matter within the healthcare context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perry. And I would have somehow a very quick question for you, which is more around the fact that, you know, listening to you and to everything you presented, there is clearly a fascination around all the technology and the advancement of the technology towards the fight against cancer. So if we were from that somehow ecosystem to land in Saudi, what would be the application that we can make out of it into the very 6 months, 8 months down the road? Meaning, what can we take out of everything you presented and say to the institutions and the academia, those are the top 2 things you cannot miss in the coming 8 months or 12 months?
Okay. Thank you for that question. You know, when speed counts, when speed is what matters, I have a 3-word response: best practice sharing. Okay. And one of the principal functions that we serve inside of GE and even among the research group is to connect our key collaborators around the world to share what's working, what's effective, and bring it into the site of interest for quick adoption and quick impact. That is far and away the best advice I can give, because we can talk about a lot of ideas, but it's when we put them in practice that it matters. And when we can connect you with our global collaborators, we will find those solutions.
That's a good one. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And again, let's move to our third speaker. This time it's Dr. Ahmed Zahrani, Director of Healthcare Technology Department in Ministry of National Guard and Health Affairs. So Dr. Ahmed works closely with a team of healthcare providers to address the workflow challenges towards digitizing and automating the processes to reach an innovative business model. Today, Dr. Ahmed will share with us what was the Ministry of National Guard Health Affairs response to the support the ventilator manufacturing initiatives by the local SMEs in the kingdom. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's start the presentation. I would start the presentation for this quote, which say, from Ibn Khaldun, which say, tough time make strong people and strong people create good time. So I'm sure that we already been through tough time last 2 years. And I hope, inshallah, we are the strong people who are going to really create a better environment for the humanity based on what we have learned from that tough time. Actually, what we're going to talk about today is how, I would share it as, I would call it as, let's say, collaborative successful story between the government and how they respond to such a pandemic that happened last year. And I would try to make it in a storytelling way, so just to get out of the theme of the scientific presentation. So let's go back in the first case, which is already reported in Saudi Arabia, which was in 2nd of March. So that was the first case reported by COVID-19, and that was the start of triggering the pandemic here in Saudi Arabia. If we go back to that date, we can look at there was a lot of issues happening globally, and you can see the situation globally happening. There was a crisis in hospitals, admission, a shortage in some kind of devices, and also a lot of medical supplier. You can see also there was a lot of economic issues as well happening globally that already gonna result as a panicking for the people. Also, there was a lot of issues for example, the mask, the shortage, and the demand increased significantly when you compare it to the supply. So that also impact the economic globally. And finally, and this is what we're gonna focus about, which is the medical devices and the high demand of the ventilator due to a lot of patients admitted in hospitals, and the shortage of the supplier happening globally, not only in Saudi Arabia. So all of these challenges being exposed that time, and it is really taking, just to think about it from mental health perspective, from the care provider, when they thought they are going to face such a disaster for the coming weeks or coming months. So there is no clear expectation what's going to happen. So this is not a risk. This is really uncertainty. So with that said, if we're going to look at the curve of pandemic, and this is from the Ministry of Health, you can see starting from March, most of the reported cases was between April, starting from April as per the paragraph, and you can see it starts going down August or last of July. Due that time, I mean, we are still in 2nd of March, and that was the discussion happening in 2nd of March before we see this graph. So we are not aware that how it's gonna happen and how can we respond on the shortage of medical devices, and especially ventilator, in the Saudi market, and how can we overcome this issue. So the collaborative happening that time between all of the government sector, it was planned to find a solution within 4 months. There was no plan that we were not expecting the pandemic gonna finish or the peak gonna go down within only 4 months, but we discussed that how can we agree on a plan within the next 4 months from April until the end of July, just to make sure that our healthcare system is secure and we have enough medical equipment, especially from ventilator perspective, in the Saudi market. And the main challenge at that time, I remember, there was a lot of countries, they lock already the export. So there was unexpected issue that even if you have some kind of ventilator, simple things like spare parts, like small things, or maybe consumables, we will not be able to import it. And that already adding a lot of, let's say, load on that challenge. I mean, during that time, alhamdulillah, from the leadership from the kingdom, there was full support, unlimited support to strengthen the healthcare. So that was reflected or translated through a lot of committees formulated during that time. And one of them was a committee, our national committee formulated to support the shortage of ventilator and find a way how can we really be able to prevent or detect or mitigate and response to that challenge which is gonna come through the pandemic. So I'm listing here, I mean, the authorities or the government sector which already collaborated during that time, and Ministry of National Guard was one of the important pillar of that committees. And I'm gonna talk about now what was the role of Ministry of National Guard, because if you look at it, it will be obvious that all of these entities, they have a really clear scope, but National Guard here is considered as a service provider from this. But the role was, I mean, the mandated role for National Guard is to support by expediting the local development process for the local manufacturers. How can we support the local manufacturer to expedite, to develop their product, if they have product? At that time, we don't know if there is any product in the local market. And how can we do a kind of process to evaluate it and see, is it visible that it can be used or not in crisis situation? For sure, we're not gonna use any device which is not been go through the trial and all of the clinical trial and all of the regulations, but that was exercise to see what can we do in the tough time that we are expecting. So if you look at it, we are not gonna go through the normal life cycle of the product development, which is here according to the FDA. So this is the normal development for any kind of product. But during that time, also there was emergency use authorization for some medical equipment. And that was maybe the opening door for us to think about if we're gonna utilize some of these equipment in case if we are shortage, how can we gonna use it, when we gonna use it, all of the processes, how can we put it all together in a systemic way to prevent kind of crisis that's gonna happen, and also to make sure that we are not compromising the patient care. So before I go the story, so this is just only I would like to highlight why Ministry of National Guard being selected to this initiative or to participate and contribute with all of other government sector to support this initiative. And mainly I think because of the three important things. First, the multidisciplinary specialty expertise. It's not only in Riyadh. The specialties that we're having across all of the kingdom, more than 6 hospitals and more than 40,000 employees. All of them, they have, great experience that they could contribute in this kind of crisis. Second, National Guard known as a pioneer in technology advancement adoption. And there is a lot of achievement being highlighted last 5 years. Also, the organizational capacity that we have, National Guard, we have a hospital, we have university, we have also a research arm like King Abdullah Medical Research Center. So all of these let's say, giving the National Guard advantage that they could really contribute with all of the other government sector to mitigate the risk that we're having. And this is an example of the things that, let's say, the multidisciplinary team heavily involved with the respiratory therapy and biomedical engineering, quality and patient safety in intensive care unit. Some of the pioneer technologies, advancement in adoption in National Guard, like the electronic medical record and integrating devices with systems, also the patient applications and innovative and integrative workflows. So we are not talking about only technologies, even the innovation of the processes and workflow within National Guard. And finally, example of the organizational capacity that in National Guard, there is a biotechnology park, simulation and testing lab, a lot of advanced test equipment, and most importantly, the innovation culture for the staff in National Guard. They have this kind of mindset, which is not considering them as producer. They also consider themselves as, not consumer, sorry, they consider themselves as producer as well. So how we respond to that situation from the Ministry of National Guard? First, internal arrangement. So we have arranged with all multidisciplinary teams. I remember there was more than 7 departments and plus more than 35 participants or members. They participated to these 2 technical or these 2 committees. So we created 2 committees, 1 technical committees and 1 medical committees. Technical committees gonna go through all of the local manufacturing initiatives and evaluating them from technical perspective. If they will pass the technical perspective, then they will go to the medical committee just only to assess and see how its visibility to utilize this product in crisis situation. Also from internal arrangement as well, we put like a path for any kind of device or any kind of local manufacturer's material or device. When it's received by National Guard or when received by the Ministry of National Guard until it's delivered the report to the National Committee with a recommendation. So you can see the stages for any local product that will be developed. First, they will have to fill the product information and we're gonna receive it. We're gonna do first inspection, and if this will be successful, the stage 3, then the product gonna go to the 3rd stage, which is the technical and functional test. It will be heavily tested through a lot of clinical scenarios. And once this will be passed, then it will go to the technical committee to evaluate if this product gonna be utilized or partially utilized somehow in the crisis situation. And then it will be approved or disapproved. Then it will go back to the National Committee to give the recommendation. So we are not talking about now certifying a product, just to make it clear. We are talking about a situation that it could be a crisis, it could be shortage. How can we deal with it? We have to have a plan B, and this is all what we are doing here to see how can we mitigate the issues. From external arrangement, we put this kind of workflow with all of the members. This is we end up with that since we receive the device from the National Center for Industrial Development, they are the gate that referring all of the local manufacturers to Ministry of National Guard, and it will go through all of the process, go through the committees, and you can see here also that if the device have technical issues, we are communicating also with the vendor to fix it and coaching them, telling them what to do, and then return back the device and see how can we improve it before we do the functional test. These are some of the local manufacturing initiative, which is already been evaluated and supported by National Guard. These 5 companies, and it was only evaluated through from May and June, just only 2 months. So these companies, I mean, the product they propose, it's categorized in 3 different categories. So first product, or 3 companies, they propose emergency resuscitator, and they propose it to be automated, and how can we utilize it in crisis, especially in emergency, if we run shortage or run out shortage of the ventilator. And the other 2 companies, which is Electronia and Advanced Electronic Company, they propose a critical care ventilator, and also just how can we utilize it in in the crisis, or if the crisis happen. And the last one is the CPAP ventilator. So this is the 3 categories that have been proposed by the local vendors. Just to not, I mean, I'm sure there's just only 5 minutes remaining. So these the kind of technical and functional tests. And if you remember when I said that one of the capacity that National Guard have is the cultural innovation. And just to end up with kind of technical and functional tests for a service provider who doesn't really have any experience before, to put kind of testing, that was one of the things or remarkable things that happened that time, because we worked together as care provider with some researchers from KMARC, with some people also from the university, all together to put a systemic way, how can we test, or let's say heavily test this kind of devices, even if it is not certified, but we want to make sure that how can really we be in the, ready for any kind of crisis. So it's summarized in 5 kind of tests as the operation challenges. So there are more than 30 operation challenges being proposed by the biomedical engineering and RT with the technical challenges. Also alarm trigger accuracy, so that was also tested, and stability test, and also stress test, that putting the device under some kind of stress situation. As a result, one of the outcome of that committee is it's end up with a performance report or technical and functional test for one of the devices, which is pass the preliminary test. And that report included all of these kind 5 tests and being sent to the national committee to look at it and give the recommendation, how can we move forward. So thankfully that time we didn't really need this kind of initiative, but that is really a proof for us in a local or in Saudi Arabia that how we resilience as a healthcare system, and how can we respond to such uncertain risk that we haven't really expected gonna happen. But the lesson learned from that is there is a lot of ongoing collaboration now happening between all of these partners, just only to facilitate and to expedite the ecosystem, or how to make the Saudi market as really a hub for all of these kind of biotechnology or biomedical devices manufacturing, and how can we expedite all of the effort and facilitate all of the local company. That was one of the most important lessons learned, and one of the most important even outcome from that exercise and journey happened in last year. Thank you so much. I'm finishing here.
Thank you, Dr. Zahrani. That was really insightful, and thanks for the storytelling approach, which definitely I'm sure our audience will appreciate. For the sake of keeping us on time, I will keep the question into the panel, and we will move to our next guest speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eli Chaillot, Vice President and CEO Services, GE Healthcare EMEA. Before this position, Eli has been leading numerous leadership positions in GE in several regions, such as Europe, Japan, and Middle East. With that, Eli will be sharing with us his views on the data and the future of healthcare in the COVID-19 era. Eli, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm pleased to be here today. Can you hear me okay? All right, so we will be looking at data and the ecosystem of healthcare after COVID-19. We all know that COVID-19 has been an unprecedented event in modern times. And so many of the changes that were led through COVID-19 pandemic were basically done in the last 18 months. Some of these changes used to take years to happen, now are taking months to happen. and some are taking weeks to happen. So the acceleration of change that happened after the COVID era have been unprecedented. And the hard-earned wisdom of 2019 and 20 and early 21 has led to have a hope that the ecosystem of healthcare is going to change in a much more resilient and much more connected, in a much more virtual way, so we can secure better precision healthcare in the future and making sure that we have the best outcome across the healthcare ecosystem. To succeed in the future, healthcare leaders will have to look into how do we make sure this is scalable? How do we make sure this is continuous and resilient? So we make sure that we make sense of the data that the medicine and clinical science is providing throughout the patient story. So today I'd like to share with you 3 topics basically around the data and how we are living this post-pandemic or through pandemic era of healthcare throughout the crisis. The first one is digital, the growth of digital across many industries, and healthcare is one of them, and most precisely the virtualization of care. So if you take telemedicine in the past, telemedicine has been underused. Consumers used to ask for it just for convenience, but there was no real sustainable, I would say, scalable offer on the market. And then as we move forward with the COVID-19 crisis, you've seen a lot of virtual visits happening, for instance, and that was happening just to keep our family safe, to making sure that we don't expose them to more, I would say, virus than what they would have. And so that went and exploded over the last few months. And by the way, in Saudi Arabia, like other countries, it was one of the things that we have observed over the last few months. And then healthcare institutions from their side, also, we have seen more and more of their staff and caregivers working digitally and virtually across the patient journey. You could see like radiologists reading more images remotely from home. You would see more clinicians and more doctors giving their service remotely. And so that exploded over the last few months more and more. And what this happened basically through this virtual care is we have seen more available resources, scarce resources connected to patients locally that would have never connected to in the past. So you would having access to specialists or super specialists from the other side of the planet or very far away from where you live as a patient in a much easier way than you did before. And so by doing this, you are using data and you are basically looking at how do you make sure that this data is not misused. And so all these hospitals, they had to keep the storage of the data in a way that you don't expose the patient in the future. So the efficiency of that data would happen more the more you store it well and the more you connect it well in the future. So there is a say in the past that I used to hear, which is specialists would know a lot about nothing and nothing about the rest, which means they are super specialized, you have much more data. And what happened with the digital systems is that these hospitals would have to store this data in a way that they connect it together and make much more sense of it and much more insights for clinical decision making in the future. So with this, we have seen the emergence of much more tele-ICU, for instance. Like we have established in India an 800-bed tele-ICU to monitor the most ill patients and enable us to, from one centralized place, monitor these patients. If you look at Saudi Arabia today, way beyond and before the pandemic, Dr. Sulaiman Habib Hospital Group have established 796 tele-ICU beds in the kingdom to monitor the most ill 24/7. And so looking into this, you will be able to free up some beds from hospitals and making sure that patients stay home and being monitored and being secured and safely watched by caregivers. And we know doctors would tell you that if we keep the patient at home in his or her social surrounding, the recovery will be much faster. And so we've seen providers and caregivers exploring the way they treat patients, and we'd see hospitals taking more and more the most ill treated in the hospital, free up beds for really very sick patients, and making sure that home becomes basically the virtual expansion of hospitals at home. So you'll see this happening more and more as we move forward. And so as we have this data, you need to make sure, how do we connect it and make sense of it? If you take like Oregon Health and Science University in the United States, they have established what we call a population surveillance between the caregivers, bedside caregivers and virtual caregivers, in order to create best practice sharing and give a state wing-to-wing of the patient status across a selected care area or a hospital for the entire health system of that district. And so to conclude on the first topic, the pandemic has accelerated trends that started before the pandemic, which is virtual health, which is virtual care. And I think we need to leverage that momentum to continue building on that, making sure that we free up resources in hospitals, extend the hospital to the home of the patient, and connect the data to make sense of it for better insights for clinical outcome. And the second point would be the convergence of clinical medicine and data science. So medicine produces a lot of data. We know that the body of data in healthcare is doubling every 73 days. And so the more data we have, the more signal we have, and the more noise we have also. And we know that 95% of that data is mainly not used today. So how do we make sense of this data? So the data science is a scientific process today to look into curating the data, into eliminating the noise, and making sure we extract that insight from the data. Today, this is being done by doctors in their heads. If you take one doctor career over 40 years, 6 days a week, they would have seen 5,000, 10,000 exams in their life. And they maybe use a decision support system that is not necessarily statewide or worldwide. But when you start taking all the data and all the insights globally for all these exams, put them together from thousands and thousands and millions of doctors, and start training the machines through machine learning into insights driven by in vitro data, in vivo data, and patient history, then your insights are much more meaningful into a precision health. So you would start looking at value-based healthcare that's going to drive outcome and increase recovery and reduce times in hospitals. So that's basically what AI is driving. During the pandemic, we have launched what we call a thoracic care suite. And this is basically an AI suite of apps that we have installed into X-ray machines. And that was enabling us to look at the lungs and thoracic abnormalities, and in order to identify any pneumonia or any tuberculosis driven by COVID-19. That helped a lot to triage patients coming to hospital during the crisis of COVID-19, basically. And so if you take like another example in the UK, so the National Consortium of Intelligent Medical Imaging, led by Oxford University, they are putting a wide range of sustainable ecosystem for academic, clinical, and industries to come together and create algorithm to find unmet needs through AI. All right, so you would see this, and all these, I would say, matters started before the COVID-19 pandemic, but they were very, very slow. And then as the COVID-19 hit, these were accelerated more and more. So basically, we have a lot of data to conclude on this subject. We have a lot of data. We need to make sense of this data. We need to connect the data. We need to make sure that we have less silos within the data in order to connect the wing to wing and to serve better the patient and get better outcome. And in this context, we want to make sure that cybersecurity at the heart of that topic in order to safeguard confidentiality. And the last topic here I would like to cover, which is another lesson learned from the pandemic, is how do we look at capacity creation and how do we look at using efficiently the resources overall. So the pandemic has pushed us to ask ourselves a few questions like, how do I minimize delays and waiting time? How do I maximize the use of resources I have, whether it's human resources or material resources? How do I improve outcome for patients? For every COVID patient, questions were, how do I make sure that the time is short? Time is absolutely critical for a COVID patient. How do I make sure that the resources like X-ray machines, CT scans, ventilators, monitors, various scarce resources during the COVID-19 are basically used by the most ill people? The deaths was on the rise during the pandemic also. So hospitals had to take a helicopter view, a big picture to understand how to allocate resources to the most ill patients hit with COVID-19. So during that pandemic, you needed to have, if you are a group of hospitals, you needed to have a central view of how are things going? What can I prevent from happening? What do I need to divert? What do I need to accelerate? Do I have enough supplies in that space or that other hospital? Do I have the right flow of patients? Do I need to divert ambulances from hospital A to hospital B? And this is what we have done during COVID. We have launched an AI suite of apps that we call Tiles in order to look at the COVID-19 patients and make sure that we predict what to happen in the future. So if you look at, most doctors today look at clinical data as a historical data. So they look at the past, they try to make sense of it, they try to connect the dots and predict, or at least diagnose what they have at hand. The command center that we have connected in 300 different institutions around the globe, and we have one already working in Saudi Arabia that we have dedicated with the help of the Ministry of Health to COVID-19 crisis management. We were able to look into which hospital has bed capacity, free. Where do we need supplies? Where do we need to reconvert or divert patients coming with COVID-19? And you were able to predict the future versus only looking at the past. And so this kind of centralizing decision and looking at like we do in NASA today, you have full screens looking at the whole healthcare systems and making sure that you are adapting the resource to the need. So all this data is basically aggregated in one place, and all we do is just creating algorithms that make us to make the right decision to help address needs across the healthcare system. And so during that pandemic, with the Ministry of Health, we were able to look into the 186 hospitals across the kingdom and looking at the help needed, the resources that are becoming rare, and address that through the Ministry of Health. So the opportunity here is that we can create in healthcare a lot of waste. We can create a lot of data, and biggest waste for me would be that we don't allocate resources where are needed. And so through the pandemic and after the pandemic, we are in the learning mode still, I would say, to maximize the utilization of resources, to making sure that it's serving the purpose and making sure that we are increasing outcome and we are using in a most efficient way the dollars invested into a healthcare system. So in conclusion on this subject overall, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of the changes that started before COVID-19 era. The utilization of the hospital is most likely going to continue to decrease, and only the sickest of the sick would use it. And I would see much more people choose it at home with home monitoring and virtual care increasing, which will increase also the recovery. Today, there's no question anymore whether AI is the right technique or technology. The question around AI is whether, how do we accelerate it? How do we use it? What do we do with it? AI is becoming an established truth to be used in healthcare and many other industries. If you look at the pharma companies, the way they worked on developing the antivirus in few months, things that used to take years and years in the past, they also shared data among themselves, among companies that would be their own competitors, just to find a quick solution and to deal with this disease. They had to scale up very quickly production for billions and billions of jabs around the globe and just distribute it. So this tells you that one company cannot solve it. One country cannot solve it. We will have to work together to make it happen. I'd like to pay a big thank you, basically, to all the caregivers and all our engineers of maintenance and all the healthcare ecosystem around the globe for being our heroes in the past 18 months, driving beyond their, I would say, duties, having sense of purpose beyond their job in order to fight this COVID-19. I think this will enable us to leave historians over the next 15, 20 years, something to marvel at and talk about. And I think the learning has just begun. We will need to capitalize on this and keep moving in order to make our healthcare complicated system today around the globe much more efficient, much more accessible, and much more precise to drive outcome for patients. So that's what I wanted to share with you today on COVID-19 and the data around the era of the pandemic.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you very much. That's really another one that is really fascinating. So I think still I would like to have a very quick question to you. Basically, this is obviously, you know, in many industries we talk about AI, and this is relatively, I would say, exciting from many aspects. Now, when we kind of take that and then land in the kingdom, and then somehow become a bit like, what do we have on hand? I'm sure that we might face some challenges in the way either it is requiring high budgets to have whatever it takes to have to read the data, or it requires talents that we might have or we might not have, or there are other challenges like regulatory or something else. So it would be great if you could shed some light about, you know, what are the challenges that we face as we speak now in the kingdom?
Yeah, that's a great question. Rather than speaking about challenges, I would speak about opportunities. When you look at Saudi Arabia today, there are two main opportunities that gives me hope that we're going in the right direction. First of all is the collaboration between the industry and the institutions. There's a huge collaboration there. We've been in the country for 80 years now, working with public and private institutions. We always looked at localizing capabilities. Right? In a country like Saudi Arabia, you have the scale, right? In the region here, Saudi Arabia has a scale that is not met anywhere else. And so how do you make sure that you localize the talent and making sure that you build expertise in the country to serve the patient of Saudi Arabia? And so that collaboration existed already. You can see today in Saudi, a lot of what we call PPPs, public-private partnerships, and also MESs, managed equipment services, on the rise. Right, where the public sector and the private sector want to come together to deliver more patient outcome. So that's the first one. I would say that there is a will and there is a budget for it, and there is a really, I would say, a noble desire to improve the customer experience overall, or patient experience in this case. The second point I want to talk about is the investment in digital in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In Saudi, so as I said in my presentation, one of the first command centers in the region, if not the first, the very first, was in Saudi Arabia. Command center is going to help you get smarter at resource utilization. And we apply AI to every single tile of the command center in order to look at the past, learn from it, and predict the future. And then maybe tweak some, I would say, figures to make it much smarter and more efficient. And the second thing is, if you look at the adoption of many of the virtual appointments and visits in Saudi Arabia across the 10 million. This data, by the way, is maybe a year old now. 10 million appointments booked online. So there is a big will by the Minister of Health, His Excellency, the Minister of Health himself, to drive digital care, to drive online bookings, to drive outcome-based healthcare. And so, to summarize, the great partnership between the industry and the institutions and the public-private partnerships is one opportunity that is already happening and we need to accelerate. The second one, the digitization of healthcare within the kingdom, driven by the Saudi Minister of Health and other public institutions, is very promising. And it's also in line with the 2030 vision of Saudi Arabia.
Wonderful. That's a great answer as well. Thank you very much. And we are now moving to our last speaker, Mr. Raymond Berglund, Managing Director and Head of Healthcare and Life Science in Alvarez Marsal, EMEA. Raymond brings with him 2 decades of experience in transformation, turnaround, and financial leadership in medical device and healthcare organizations. Today, Raymond will share with us his views on what is the roadmap to build a medical device industry in KSA. So again, without no more transition, Raymond, the floor is yours.
Usha, thank you very much. And marhaba, assalamu alaikum to everybody in the room there and across the world. And I appreciate it. Thank you for the audience today. I'd like to say that I am a relatively simple guy. I come from the medical device industry. I was the CFO of the respiratory business at GE Healthcare. I also worked in orthopedics, as well as wound care. So I've gone everywhere from capital equipment all the way to consumables and what I might call fancy Band-Aids. So what I was thinking about was, KSA and the Vision 2030 of taking the economy of the kingdom to another level. It's going to require a number of industries to step up. And that definitely includes the medical device industry. So I wanted to talk through some ways of thinking about how to invest and actually how to pragmatically grow a medical device industry. So, oh great, the little clicker works. So I'm controlling my own slides. Like I said, I'm simple. When it comes to medical devices, you have to invent it, you have to make it, and you have to sell it in its most simple form. Obviously, there's plenty of regulations, there's plenty of work to be done for patient safety and how do you apply it? What are the reimbursements around it? There's a lot there. But when it comes to making a medical device industry, you need to invent, you need to make, and you need to sell. And when we break that down just a little further, what you have is discovery and development. So understanding and finding a new technology or new application, and then development would be a clinical study. You've got to manufacture it, you've got to sell it, and then you have aftermarket service. And so let's talk about market maturities. KSA is not going to just set up and start building MRI machines. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to have an export immediately. You've got to start somewhere. And so I look at it and I say, well, what's the early stages of a medical device or medical technology industry in that make it, invent it, make it, sell it framework? So early stage development is going to be generally driven from academics and places like the King Abdullah Medical Research Center and some of the great universities. And so those areas, those groups must be rewarded. They must be funded to drive partnerships with private companies, with external companies beyond the borders, and also complete studies, clinical studies in country and out of country. You're also going to have what I call component CMOs. So this is where you're going to make a part or a piece that will then end up in that ventilator that Dr. Al-Zarani spoke about, right? You need to be able to have simple manufacturing in country that is competitive with other contract manufacturers around the world. If you look at Eastern Europe, for instance, it's a great example of where they might not be making all of the largest machines and all the largest capital equipment, but they are making lots of parts and pieces for medical devices. And they have quality levels and inspection levels that reach to that. And that's early stage work. And then, of course, on the selling side, consumables distribution. You can think about some of the most developing countries where just getting out first aid type of advanced wound dressings, simple consumables and replenishing those. That's probably the simplest, earliest stage of medical technology. And then when you think about what's in that growth stage, when do we start seeing this increase? Well, early on, what you're going to have is private investment. Investors that say, hey, I will fund your research and your way to gain intellectual property. And then we will use a contract research organization who does a lot of studies because they're able to kind of take the cost of multiple studies and combine that. So you start to see those organizations be created within the country and doing services outside the country. You also see CDMOs, rather than contract manufacturers, contract development and manufacturing, and satellite sites. We've got Danaher on here, we've got GE on here, we've got a lot of different companies. Obviously, if they have a satellite site in KSA, that means they have trust and belief in the labor force and the work to actually produce product. And then you've got basic medical device sales, things like ventilation, and then the in-servicing and the service depot, completing it in country, making sure the product gets put into place and serviced in country. And then what is that mature stage? Well, you got big corporate investment. Corporations will fund research. I mean, think about the fact that it costs nearly $2 billion right now to make a drug, a couple $100 million to make a big medical device. And the corporations will fund that early on so that they get the return later on with the intellectual property and the advanced machines that they make. You also have headquarter manufacturing locations, and you'll be working with big capital equipment and medical education, and you'll be doing value add optimization. There's a number of groups within Saudi Arabia in the healthcare space that use basically command centers. And so they know how best to utilize their facilities, and you do that with medical equipment as well. So what's my assessment of Saudi Arabia? We've got a little green, we've got a little yellow, and we've got a little red. And I look at the green because I know we've got some great companies. You know, you think about Gulf Medical, Themar, and a couple others. You've got a lot of companies that do great distribution, right? In-service, installation of the product. And I think we continue to grow that. I think that's important. And I think the key piece of it, though, is that you're buying that equipment from external countries. So it's an import that then gets put into place. You need that service. You need that sales and commercial zone, but you also need to get upfront and way upstream in that invent it and make it zone. And I think we've got some good things going in the invention and the early stage IP work. But then we also need to get into the manufacturing space. And I want to talk about those and not take too much time for you. So 2 slides on inventing it. So when I think about KSA and I think about inventing it, you've got to compare yourself to the global intellectual property landscape. And in that top right box there, you can see that Saudi Arabia is certainly not at the top, certainly not at the bottom, but still running in that mid-tier space, 25th in the world on patents, 60th in the world on industrial designs, 44th on trademarks. And as far as countries that are using the US Patent Office, which is one of the strongest patent offices to utilize, they're 23rd in the world of countries that are importing patents and registering them there. And then KSA's very own patent office, under the Ministry of Commerce and Investment, takes about 30 months for a final decision. I point out that the most innovative countries in the world, China, US, Australia, Korea, and Japan, really range from 22 to 14 months, right? And so if KSA wants to become a intellectual property business, really driving a industry, you need to start moving that down the line. So I call on that Ministry of Commerce and Investment to consider, how do you speed that up? Whereas the rest of the medical device space needs to start to drive inventions. So I look at it, I say, you know what? How do we improve inventing it? I think Saudi Arabia needs to view intellectual property as an export, as important as anything in the country. You need to invent and send out into the world. And we know the top exports from Saudi. We know what counts. Intellectual property should count as much. We need to accelerate the Saudi Patent Office patent review and granting velocity, increase academic grants to focus on research from the academies, establish an incentive plan. You know, this is a way for Saudi nationals, Saudi citizens, whether they're in country or out of country, to be driving IP. And if they become rewarded for it, it drives the right behavior. And it's reward for not just necessarily the Saudi Patent Office, but the US Patent Office, the Patent Office in China and Japan and others. You know, driving Saudi citizens to be part of the IP landscape is very important. And increase the direct incentives for KSA-based businesses that submit and are awarded patents. And right now, we're in the process of getting the Patent Prosecution Highway set up, the PPH, and that needs to be completed successfully. Then people will trust that their patents are kept legally protected in Saudi Arabia, and that's very important. And fund and accelerate accelerators, ensure the SFDA, the Saudi FDA registrations are rapid, and celebrate our great innovators in Saudi Arabia. I mentioned a few here. But on the right-hand side, I say, how many global medical technology patents have been filed? And if you look at it, it's doubled since 2008 into 2018, and it's only continuing to grow. So Saudi needs to be a part of that. So if I just keep on moving, make it. This is another key piece. And I'll move through this to say, all right, this is where we're going to get into manufacturing. If you think about what MedTech CDMOs are often utilized in the pharma space, but MedTech is using CDMOs as well. This is an industry that from 2019 to 2025 will double in size. It's growing at double-digit rates, about 12%. And there's a number of different industries. We talked about respiratory care just a little bit earlier that have multiple areas of growth. Now, the med device market globally is only growing about 5%, but the CDMO market is growing over double that. And so I think that's very important to understand and to become a part of. The CDMO needs a couple of specific things, prerequisites. You got to have quality levels, you got to have regulatory compliance, and you got to have a business case for an OEM from a big manufacturer or a startup, a group that just wants somebody to manufacture their product that they've invented. You need to have a good business case for them. And I think the labor rates of Saudi Arabia actually make a lot of sense. There should be some good manufacturing in Saudi Arabia because exports are going to be where the economy begins to expand and actually differentiate itself. So differentiators, high innovation, high technology, move in that direction. Scalability, can you ramp up and ramp down with market demands? Geographical footprint. There's not much in the CDMO space in the Middle East, and access to Africa, access to the subcontinent, access to Eastern Europe. These are things that Saudi has, and so that geographic coverage might actually get you into that emerging space that very few have. And then a one-stop shop. If you could be a complete CDMO, great. If you could be just a CMO for a component, okay, you got to start somewhere. There's other success factors we can talk about, commercial excellence, portfolio optimization, these types of things, but I won't belabor the point, but you get it. We can get this industry off the ground. Here's some examples, right? We've got companies that show up across the spectrum, and these are just a few. And so you take these into account, and you can make either these partners, or you can try to create a similar setup as these businesses within Saudi. So I'll just move forward. So why do OEMs use those CDMOs across that value chain? Cost reduction. They really want to make sure that they can get the parts cheaper, right? It's an option for startups. Startups might invent something, they have a prototype, but they need a company to build it for them. So it's not all just being a manufacturer for a large multinational corporation. Lots of times it's for startups. And that's why I say make sure you get your IP off the ground, because then you'll really start to get the startups looking for your CMOs and CDMOs. Market access, getting access to the Saudi and GCC markets. Technical insight, a CDMO might have some capabilities that they've invested in. Product speed, getting things to market quickly. Quality controls, a certified site that's been audited, that's been reviewed, and of course the scalability. So in some cases, KSA has these types of things. In some cases they don't, but it's an area that must be invested in, and somebody must drive this as a business leader and as someone wanting to expand this space. So if I just take us, nope, I had not. So this is the slide I just spoke through. So talked about why OEMs use CDMOs, right? So you've got those businesses. We need those types of businesses in KSA. So very last slide, take action. You got to light the candle at both ends. We've got the commercial groups going, we've got them growing, but we need to get IP and manufacturing into place in KSA. So play the long game. Innovation and manufacturing take a long time. Start in the early stages, get the academics going, incentivize IP. IP should be a great export from Saudi Arabia. build on partnerships. Encourage other CDMOs, those logos that you saw on the slide. Bring them into KSA. Have them open a site. Encourage that. Get products manufactured in the borders, and then look beyond the borders. Send the products out. Send it around the world. Make KSA products and KSA innovation something to be sought after. Be fast and be easy to work with. It needs to be simple for somebody to get a Saudi visa, which I think was all just blurred out there. But make decisions. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. I think we've all done projects in the Middle East. There's a lot of people to go through for decision making, and I challenge everybody to make the decision, move forward. You will continually change direction as you go, and then build on success. You've got some great companies doing great work with medical devices there. Encourage them, build on with them, invest with them, and I think you'll have an opportunity to build a great medical device market. Bushra?
Thank you. At this stage, we are going on break. It is 4:42 Riyadh time, and we are supposed to come back at 4:40 sharp. So we have 18 minutes break. Thank you all.
Great.
And we'll come straight for the panel, and Raymond will be the leader of the panel.
Thanks.
The pandemic has taught the world of the importance of science.
And our mission is to improve the health of our communities,
including a clear message about how the benefits will flow to the community more broadly.
Riyadh Global Summit for Medical Biotechnology aims to push the boundaries towards a targeted and sustainable medical biotechnology enterprise in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Let's hear from the Summit Chairman and the Summit Vice Chairman.
Riyadh Global Medical Biotechnology Summit 2021 present truly a fascinating program as a blend of sessions dedicated to strategy development, business development, as well as other sessions dedicated to technology development, infrastructure development, to serve truly establishment of medical biotechnology ecosystem vibrant in the country, as well as other sessions dedicated to scientific topics such as genomics, genetics, gene editing, stem cells, and others. All of those are being delivered by top leaders in the field from global pharmaceutical company and biotechnology companies from around the globe, as well as leading academic institutions with the aim to forge global partnerships that are of interest and will impact the country and the rest of the world.
محمد.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your break. So now I will hand over to Ms. Bushra bin Saud, President of Danahir Corporation, Middle East, Africa, and Turkey, to carry on with the panel discussion with her esteemed panelists. To you, Ms. Bushra.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we are getting into the famous Q&A session. I'm going to invite Raymond to lead the session on our behalf. And of course, I'll stay around to make sure that we wrap it up properly. Let's get started.
She's going to keep us on time, of course, which we all appreciate. And Dr. Al-Zarani, we see you. I know you're very lonely up on stage there. We'll come join you soon enough.
Sure.
I'll be down there in a few weeks, so maybe we can meet in person. But listen, I appreciate everybody's input. I mean, we heard a lot about response to COVID. We've heard a lot about data. We've heard a lot about diagnostics and how this is changing the sharing of best practices. So we've got a couple of questions that we've come together from some of the chat room sessions. We're trying to answer those as well. But I'm going to start with Perry, actually. And I just wanted to ask you about, because I came from GE as well. And being a global company, you've got the experience of seeing other fast-growing and developing markets. And so I asked, what can Saudi Arabia learn when it comes to adopting and utilizing the best medical technologies or creating a medical technology market itself from those other countries that have developed it?
Okay, thanks, Raymond. Well, listen, I think you touched on some of the elements during your own presentation today. I mean, you really need to set up an ecosystem and an infrastructure that is favorable to doing development, building expertise in the area. There's an educational component as well. And, there are opportunities with grants. You touched on this as well, which help build that infrastructure. At least they exist in Europe. And we try to leverage those when we can, because when we can find synergies between what a government's trying to institute on behalf of its people and ecosystem, and have that overlay with our own development interests, we can participate in a grant together, which helps accomplish both goals. So I really think it's about making that decision, building that infrastructure, putting the things in place to enable those types of opportunities for industrials to come in and help you on that journey.
Great. No, thanks. Thank you. Insightful. Dr. Al-Zarani, up on stage there. I'll reach out to you. I said, MedTech, you talked about, very close to my heart, in the respiratory space. We were building CPAPs and ventilators, actually during swine flu, if anybody remembers that one, a number of years ago. But MedTech is huge. MedTech and diagnostics is just an absolutely massive global industry. So, what are the sub-segments that you think, KSA should play in to really start to create more innovation and maybe kind of move a part of the industry forward?
Thank you so much for this question. Really, this is a very important question. And actually, we figure out this kind of misunderstanding from the local companies and when they bring the product that I already presented during the pandemic. So if you remember, there are 3 categories of product that have been provided by the local vendors: EMBOBAG and CPAP and critical care ventilator. Actually, when the people who brought EMBOBAG to the discussion and how can we take it and make it as a plan B if there is a crisis happening. So actually that was not the need of the market. So that's the first mistake. So the first mistake happening from the local manufacturing, they have to know what's the market demand. Or maybe you have to create the market demand in order to start putting all of these kind together. So that's one of the things. And even we told them in the beginning, we told them, guys, we appreciate all of the effort, but just shift it a little bit to something else. This is the need. If we're going to go plan B, we'll not really need EMBOBAG. EMBOBAG could damage the patient lung. It cannot maybe also help the patient. So one of the important things is to know to have a clear market research, to know the demand in the market, or to create a demand in the market. Based on that, you're gonna know which, as you mentioned, which kind of technology can be localized or can be supported or could be joint venture with international companies, and it could be sold in the local market with competitive pricing, and also to make it, available in this market and also in the region. As we remember in the first session that with the opening, the plan of Saudi Arabia to be hub in the market and to hub in the region, all of the Middle East region. And I think first that all of these local companies need really guidance, need a clear data to access the market, to know what exactly need in the market in order for them to pursue which kind of strategy they want to build. Only medical materials, they want to build ventilators, maybe they want to build only just kind of spare parts. It doesn't need to start big. You can start small and then grow a little bit. So that's my comment on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very insightful. I think you're absolutely right. You've got to start somewhere. You can have a vision, absolutely, but you've got to take that first step. And even if it's the spare parts and those types of things, it matters. You start you get into the value chain, right? So that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to go to Sharif. Look, when it comes to developing and growing a diagnostics, a medical technology type market, you've got to have a culture around it, and you got to have an innovative culture. And, we all kind of talked about how, the speed that COVID brought us forward with it, taking action and doing things that only took, it used to take months or years in only a couple of weeks, which is great. And it proved that we can do some fun things. But how do you create an innovative culture in KSA? What are some thoughts and some steps around that so that we can get further into MedTech and diagnostics?
Hey, thank you for the question. For me, it's all about digital transformational now. Creating more value with efficient cost in the new health ecosystem. Integration of data from different new technologies is a key challenge, and it would be an opportunity and a driver. Adapting to the digital era requires shift towards flexible and risk-taking mindset. It means letting go of outdated processes and trusting that disruption will yield big results. For example, telemedicine, artificial intelligence-enabled medical devices, blockchain electronic health reports are just a few concrete examples of digital transformation in healthcare, which are completely reshaping how we connect and interact with health professionals, patients, how our data is shared among providers, and how decisions are made about our treatment plans and healthcare outcomes. Innovation is the name of the game here, with the main goal of streamlining physicians, optimizing systems, improving patient outcome, reducing human error, and lowering cost at the end through amazing web and mobile experiences. That's in summary from my side.
Great. No, thank you, Sharif. You mentioned you got to do away with outdated processes. You've got to move forward. You got to break the mold. And so I think you're absolutely right. It's good to understand that, because we're going to need to move faster and more innovatively, right? Ellie, I'm going to put you, sir, on the spot a little bit. Bushra asked you kind of what are the two challenges in the market, but actually we had a question in the chat room. And it was, I thought it was a good question, and I put a quick response myself on there before we hop back in, but someone asked, how do I get into medical devices, right? And so someone who's had a career in medical device and the technology, and now here it is, it's changed so much. You're talking about all this data and how to tie that together. it's evolved a lot since you and I first got into it. So how does somebody get into that? You know, we have a lot of people watching and listening right now, and it'd be a way to get that set up. So how do you get somebody in?
If I understand well, the question is like, how do I get into the business of making medical devices, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, just how does somebody become part of the innovative culture and creating medical devices?
Good question, and I'll try to be very brief. In my perspective, because this is very subjective, medical devices of 20 years ago and medical devices of today are very, very different. We used to be chasing the data in the past. So we wanted to have medical devices that will give us signals about the health of a given patient. Today we have tons of those. And the next generation of medical devices is medical technologies, basically, which is the data. What do we do with it? So it's kind of an Uberization of the medical devices business, right? So you have the hardware part and you have the software part. In the past, the software was a very tiny piece of that ecosystem. Today, it's the biggest piece of that ecosystem. And we are in a storming phase. The medical device technologies, medical device companies, technologist companies, and even non-healthcare companies, by the way, coming from other backgrounds, are coming into saying, all right, there's a race today of making sense of this data generated by medical devices. So without being too objective or subjective here, I think the next generation of medical device companies is going to start from the end, not from the beginning, which is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? How do I achieve it in a smarter and less costly way? So how can I be most cost effective? How do I allocate the right resources? And shall I start with the hardware or shall I start with the software, right? That's one angle to answer your question, right? There are many other angles, but this is how it personally.
Yeah, exactly. It's not always a classic career path. You know, electrical engineering is a great thing, but software engineering and computer science becomes more and more a part of this. So that's great. That's helpful.
BNP has never had any hotels to manage in the past.
Yeah, exactly. So
there are many examples like this that you can find today.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And Ian, if I could go to you, sir, for a final point. You know, just in summary, you know, why is MedTech and diagnostics a great market for KSA to focus and support for growth?
That's a good question. I think the curse and privilege of speaking after everybody else kind of meant much of the answers have already been said. I mean, I think we heard throughout the session today of both the challenges and opportunities in this area. We've seen, I mean, we're living in the middle of a pandemic. We are not out yet. If that doesn't highlight the need for investment and investment in the area of diagnostics and medtech, then I'm not sure what does. But when you look beyond that, I think we heard from Perry, for example, talk a lot about, you know, the challenges, but certainly opportunities for improvement and enhancement of the way we deal with oncology, for example. We have an aging population. Oncology rates are not going anywhere. I think if you look at the healthcare challenges moving forward, we spoke about AMR, but oncology, non-communicable diseases, other diseases associated with an aging population, the challenges are only going to get richer and more difficult, and so we have to stay ahead of it. You know, we owe it to our patients and we owe it to the community, and I think it is an area that unfortunately will continue to grow. I think medtech and diagnostics, the need is only going to grow. It's a future area, and I think somewhere with the mindset and innovation that Saudi is trying to develop or is developing, I think they place themselves well to think differently. I mean, as Ellie just said, you know, the market and the world we live in is very different from the one 10, 20 years ago where it was dominated by laboratories and technicians and things like that. Now, many of the solutions are coming from the digital element and things like that. And I think going back to just to touch on the career path, I think we're seeing value in our company of bringing non-healthcare professionals from all walks of life into our business, because the business and the market is going in who knows what direction. There's a lot of opportunities for the market and for people within that to come and look at it from a different lens. You know, biochemists like myself are no longer necessarily at the heart of the innovations coming from others outside of the industry. So it's an exciting time. There's a lot of growth, but still the impact that we can have on society is probably the number one reason that we need to invest in this area.
Absolutely. No.
And I think for all the young people out there watching, this is just an area that is so rich in opportunity, whether you're at the tail end, like Ellie suggested, with data integration, the data's there, just putting it together, or disruptive technologies that are either benefiting caregivers, patients, payers, right? We've got a productivity problem and payment problem too. A lot of good ideas are needed. They continue to be needed.
Yeah. Indeed. Great. No, thank you. And don't sell yourself short, Ian. We're still going to need biochemistry engineers. We're going to need people. So
I was never a very good biochemist.
So I appreciated everybody. Thank you for the input, and I will hand it back to Bushra to go ahead and wrap up this great session.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure to be listening, without having the pressure to question each and everyone. So thank you for the 30 minutes of very interesting insights. Now, I mean, it will be not giving credit to everything that was said if I could say that I summarized, but I could say I picked some highlights from what has been said. I think that would be more, giving credit to all the quality presentations that I have seen. I could say that as a wrap-up, I could start by the molecular diagnostics have come to the forefront of this battle against the COVID-19. That's something that was striking to me as of the beginning of this session with Ian and Sherif's presentation. Then they also mentioned that as we look forward to a time beyond the pandemic, we have a huge opportunity to leverage this innovations in the diagnostics and MedTech industry to address critical public health threats. And I think this one is important because it's like opening a huge opportunity for us as industrials, but also for the people to be well treated, even more importantly. I also was quite impressed by the part that is more linked to the technology and quality of data gathered, analytics generated, and how this will be shaping the future of diagnostics. This in general, and more specifically on the examples from Perry when it comes to molecular medicine, when it comes to molecular imaging, all the examples that the leaders from GE Healthcare has brought were really fascinating, and I think there is a lot to learn from that. And finally, I would conclude with what Raymond left with us, which is more around a medical device industry is a long trajectory. And what matters is just to get started somewhere. If I can summarize it in a simple way, it is not to get in a complex mode, but rather go step by step, every day, 20 miles. That's from a book that I loved reading some time ago. But that's important because we go step by step, but it requires discipline. It requires passion, because after a number of steps, then we have the results that we want. And that's how I would like to summarize. Before concluding, I would like to really thank the speakers, all of them, with the perspectives that you brought. They are very different, they are diverse, and that's the beauty of it. I would like to thank the organizing sponsors, the team that was supporting us, because it was a great opportunity to share our views and to be able to bring our piece of the puzzle. I wish to the NGHA a successful summit. And with that, I think we are even ahead of time. We can conclude unless there is any question that anyone would send us from the chat. I'm looking at the chat box and I don't see any question, unless you guys see anything. But with that, we are completing the session. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you all for sharing with us your greatly informative insights on how the application of medical technology develop treatments, prevent diseases, and enhance the human lives. Ladies and gentlemen, now we'll be diving into a very interesting topic, cell biotechnology and gene therapy. To start the session, it's my pleasure to welcome the chairman of the session, Dr. Mariam Fuch, Global Therapeutic Area Lead, Cell and Gene Therapies, Oncology, Regulatory Affairs at Novartis. After 5 minutes, stay connected.